Welcome back to another Thursday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm your Thursday host Yeka, and this week we are talking about bones and death. So our topic seed comes from our own Danni, who you can read in the description below, found an article and gave us this topic of talking about the use of human bone in ritual. So I'm not really going to talk about the article. If you're interested in it, go ahead, click on it, give it a read, see what it's up. But I'm going to use it as a launching off point to talk about death, and then circle back around to relating more to the article in terms of consent, of use of our bodies or body parts, or that of animals and other life. So I'm not going to focus specifically on just humans, but expand that to sort of a larger picture. And I'm going to try and keep this a little bit short because this is a topic that actually could be really, could take up a lot of footage and time. So we'll see how quick I can make this. So starting with death, I would argue that life and death are really the same, or at least part of the same thing. They're part of this cycle of birth, growth, life, decay, death, decay, and regeneration. But that cycle in itself is part of an even larger cycle. That's just the part that happens here on Earth, as part of Earth, and perhaps other places, we don't know. But it's part of this galactic cycle that's happening, of this exchange of material, this exchange of resources, happening on a scale that we can see the movement of material from on this just massive scale. And the material that makes us, right, the elements that we're made up of, come from many cycles, we're actually, several cycles in, of the formation and death of stars. And so these stars formed, and in their bellies, heavier elements were formed, and in their deaths and the explosions, even heavier ones from there, after, we reached the point of iron. And then there were the clouds of gas and dust which get pushed around by these various forces. And eventually one was compressed enough, we believe, to form us, right? To form our star, to form the sun and the planets and all of the different bodies surrounding the sun that are part of our solar system, and those materials that eventually became life. And life is just part of the earth, moving around, reassembling itself into new patterns. And then those patterns become part of other patterns. So in the earth, part of the universe, so we're just little bits of the universe reassembling ourselves into patterns that are able to actually perceive and understand, not perhaps understand, try to understand the universe. So who knows? Life may or may not be other places. Personally, I would be absolutely shocked if it isn't other places, but certainly the cycle that we're part of, that life is part of, is everywhere that we can see, at least. But here on Earth, as part of Earth, and kind of the calling on Earth bothers me a little bit because it's not quite, because that implies a separation between us and the Earth that I don't really think exists. But I don't look at life as this body, this me, who I am, I don't think is a soul or something separate coming and inhabiting this body, driving it around like a vehicle and then leaving it when this body dies. I think that this body is me and is the life. And it's not the same as it used to be, as it will be. It is made up of trillions, and I'm not exaggerating there, beings, right? So we've got my own cells and hopefully a very healthy biome on my skin and in my gut throughout my body of bacteria and other microbes that are making up this being. So that's one level. But what this is, this being and you, and I'm going to talk about me because it's easiest, but this applies, I equally to you. It applies to the cat who's running around making noise. It applies to the tree, this thing, the tree that it came from, the sunflower, all these lives, that we're made up of material of other bits of life, right? At least on the scale that we exist, on the level that we exist, because it's a little bit different. I'm being bit right now by a cat who wants to play. That on our trophic level, on the scale of life that we can see, everything that is us, almost, right, there's a few little exceptions, was first came from other life. Other life had to take something else, change it around a little bit, and then pass it on through death, usually, not always, right, had to pass it on to another bit of life, who then passed it on to another one, to another one, to another one, to us. And then it doesn't end with us, and after us, yes, we've got our big death where our bodies are broken down and decay. And by the way, decay is, and they rot, right? So that's another word for other life coming and eating, to break down some other life, passed on to us. So that'll pass on. But then also, and that'll be used for other life, but it's not just our big death at the end. The cells, each of our little cells die, and they reproduce and make a new cell. But there had to be the death of that cell, and when those cells refuse to die, right, when they don't die, that's what we call cancer, very simply put. But you are breathing out, right? That carbon that we're breathing out, the oxygen, those things came from other life and were part of our bodies for a while, were used in our cells, were used as part of what we are, who we are, and then we released it back out. Our skin, right? We're growing skin, the skin cells die, and then they fall off, and then they're eaten by something else. Our excrement, we can keep going. We are continuously part of this cycle of the material that we use to build us was something else, used to be part of another life, and that life then came into us, and then it goes on and passes on into another life, and this beautiful continuous complex web that we are very, very much a part of and cannot be separated from, because that is life and that's existence. I think it's very arrogant of us to try to separate ourselves from that, and we can pretend that we have, but I think we're just we're lying to ourselves if we pretend that we do, because that's, as far as we can tell, how the world is, how it works. The meaning behind what that is, or the why of it, there's a lot of debate for that, but that happens, there isn't that's not really debatable. So I think that we are made of so life is many, many small deaths, is a fabric. So life is a fabric of trillions of deaths, and I'm not exaggerating on that number, of the trillions of deaths that it took to become us. So what we make of that, what we think of that, I don't have an answer for the meaning of that, or how we then go and use that information. And I think there's a lot more to it than we've even begun to understand that there might be to understand. So of course that brings us to our attitudes and beliefs about death, right? And how do we relate to death? How do we use it? And what came from another being, how do we use that? And that's going to mean something very different to different people, depending on the individual, depending on the culture that they're coming from. We all use things from others, as I was just saying, but what does it mean? And for some people, going to the human bone part of it, the remains of that loved one are something that are very sacred and have a meaning beyond for them than just the physical material that it is, that they believe that there is more to it or it has more of a meaning. Personally, I have a very pragmatic approach to that with my own body. I donate blood every 8 weeks. I nurse a child. I pump for another one. I'm an organ donor. So if something were to happen to me and my body parts were usable, then somebody else would get to use them, that sort of thing. But not everybody has that approach, or some people have a more extreme approach than I do on that. So so that brings us to consent. And I think that what was going on in that article, the consent was a really big issue. Something that people really reacted to was that, hey, this person didn't really have permission to be using the bones of these other people. Well, the people obviously were dead that the bones came from, but then there were the families and the communities that they came from. And so, for some people that's a really big issue. Personally, I think it's important to respect others, even if you don't agree with their approach to remains, that they also have those, and to respect that about them. I understand from a legal perspective why the use of human body parts would be restricted. That can get into some real tangly stuff there, so I get that. But I think that I want to talk not just about humans, and about the consent from from the family and from the individual, but also humans. We're not the only things here. We're not the only animals. We're not the only life. There's a lot more life than just us, even though we can kind of forget that in our everyday hustle and bustle. But we're constantly making decisions for other beings, right? For other humans as well, even though we might not always admit it or think about it that way, based on our economic choices, being a parent, right? I make choices every day, every hour, for another human being that she doesn't get to make those choices yet, because I'm making them for her because she's an infant. And that's an interesting question to think about in terms of, do I think that's okay? Do I not think that's okay? I start to make at some point, she's going to be making the decisions for herself. When is that? And stepping back the okay, I think that's a human construct. But of course we're humans, so we live within a human context. I mentioned the cat who's running around hyper and wanting to play. I make decisions for him all the time that often, much of the time, there's implied consent, but other decisions that I don't think I quite certainly don't think that he consented to being neutered, but that was a decision that I made for him. We can go beyond animals. I mean, animals are easy for us to talk about because they are similar to us in a way that we can understand. So life shares different types of life share different qualities. And it's easy for us to relate to life that shares qualities with us. Things like emotions and our type of intelligence that we have, physical characteristics, things like that. So that's why folks often will value life like us more than we value life that isn't like us. And how we decide who counts often has to do with those qualities and how much we value those particular qualities to see who we care about and who we don't. And I don't mean that in a harsh way, but just in a really down to it, that's what's going on. But we make choices. Does the carrot consent to me eating it? Does I'm wearing cotton, right? Does the cotton consent to that? And those we say, okay, well, consent. Do plants have consent? Maybe, I don't know. Does the cat? I would say that the cat is capable of consent, or not. You know, we're getting into this realm of questions where I'm just sort of talking here because I don't believe I have the answer. What I believe is that there's many answers, because I believe that these are all ideas and concepts that we have constructed, and that there isn't a universal right and wrong, and that we find our meaning within that, and that each person, each group or culture is going to come to conclusions on their own of what that is. So using body parts, right? Whether that use is for ritual, or that use is for something like clothing, or eating, or construction materials, or medicine, I think is a very personal decision. I choose to use other beings in a very conscious way. So, you know, obviously I don't always, but it's an effort that I try to make, and recognizing that as part of life, that is unavoidable, so I can be very conscious about it. And I think that sometimes a feather or a bone or fur, this fur isn't actually real fur, this one is, but I love this one that says sheep. I've had it for years, and it's like the comfiest thing in the world. This used to be life, though, actually. This is a plastic which comes from hydrocarbon, which tens of hundreds of millions of years ago were cyanobacteria, so it does come from life to create this. But anyways, I use these, try to recognize and celebrate the life that died, so that more life might be, and this cycling that is going on. This is very central for me in being a pagan, in that recognition and celebration and very conscious use of this great cycle that we're a part of. And the question of how much is okay for another individual, what is another individual, I think is something that each person gets to approach on their own. And that's something really cool about modern paganism, is that for the most part, there are some exceptions, but most of us don't have some other authority telling us the answers to that. It's something that we get to work on and come to on our own, although we are informed, of course, by how we were raised and the culture we live in and the people around us, and by our species. So I think didn't succeed in making this a short video, and it's a little bit kind of all over the place here, but I did want to talk about death and life. I think it's very appropriate for this time of year, at least for the Northern Hemisphere, and about using others, right? Using others in ritual, or not just ritual, because I don't think that magic and mundane are separate things. I think they're just different sides of the same coin, or different ways of understanding the world. So I will see you next week. I'm going to head out and finish harvesting the very last of the summer garden. And until next time, take care.